Africa?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Now I'm trying to, hello, good afternoon. I can see you.
You can't see me?
No. Let me see with Eleonora. Eleonora? Eleonora?
She's silenced. Yes.
Eleonora, can you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Can you try to talk?
She says, I can hear you.
Yes.
I can hear all of you.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you
also,
hear me?
yeah, we can
Okay.
hear you, and we also gave you access. I gave you access as speaker. Can you try to share your screen?
Yes.
Yes, it works, Eleonora.
Can you see it?
Yes, yes, I can see
Yes.
it. And okay, Eleonora, so you're okay. And what about you, Africa? Would you like to try?
Do you want
Sure.
me to say? I have to disconnect. Wait.
Yes, yes.
Otherwise, she cannot do it.
Yes. Right.
Okay.
Okay, I'll try now.
Yes.
Dai, vieni dentro se vuoi venire dentro, dai. Non falla sciacquare qua.
Okay, the same problem as yesterday, I'm afraid.
But did you, as you said, did you upload?
Yes, I downloaded Teams, but it doesn't seem to be working now. Oh my God. No. The same as the other day. I don't know why. And I don't get, up there, I don't have the share thing. I have it in the middle, and that means that I'm not.
And now? No, imposto come relatore here. Yes. So I gave you access to participating as speaker within this Teams platform. Can you check it again, Africa?
I'll try.
But the problem is that we can't see you.
You can't see me?
No, can you see her, Eleonora?
No, no.
I can see you, and I have my screen is on. I don't know what's happening.
But I can't find. I don't know. Let's do that. I leave, and then because I can't find actually the attiva disattiva camera, which is in Eleonora.
Do you want me to leave the room and come in again?
Yes, please do it. Yes. Mi dovrebbe arrivare la richiesta, no, Eleonora?
Sì, dovrebbe.
Ecco, c'è Federica, vediamo con Federica.
Ma lei purtroppo aveva problemi anche l'altra volta.
Ma mi aveva detto
sono
che...
qui.
Ciao Fede, consenti videocamera. Ok, ciao Fede.
Ciao.
Eccola, bene, aspetta che ti do anche a te accesso come imposta relatore. Nel frattempo Fede vuoi provare a... Ah, ecco, scusa un attimo che provo a far entrare nuovamente Africa. Ecco, consenti videocamera e consenti microfono. Ok Fede, tu funzioni, ti puoi sconnettere. Imposta come relatore. Africa, you can try now because now we can see you, but
I'm in.
yeah, yes, you're in. The
Yeah.
problem is sharing your screen. Would you like
I
to try
think
again?
I think it's okay now. Hello, Federica.
Hi, Africa. How are
Hi.
you?
I'll try now, okay? Because now I have all these things are upwards, and that means that I'm in with Teams, Alessandra.
Yes.
So I'll
Yes.
try now to
Yes.
share, okay?
Yes, please do it. You are sharing, but you're not sharing your presentation. So try to share your presentation. You are within Teams.
Yeah. Okay. I have this ready, but it's no longer ready. Okay, I'll try now. Let's see if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Fine. So
Great. Now, if you want, you can use below at the end
Yeah.
of the screen on the bottom, you can see there is this kind of television screen. You can see if you go there, maybe you can have full. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Perfect. Great. If you want, you can do it now. Would you like to try to go backwards and forward? The next slide. Would you like to try? Yes, perfect. Great. So leave it because you are the first speaker. So maybe you can leave it as it is. Great.
As it is.
Yes, I think
Fine.
so because
Great.
you are the first speaker. So we will start with you.
Thank you.
Is that too much light from the back? Shall I put it a little bit?
Maybe a bit further.
So Alessandra, Africa is the first?
I think Africa is the first, you are the second, and Federica is the last.
Okay,
one.
okay.
I mean, I think this is how it is written in the program.
Alan, it's not according to the program. According to the program, I'm the second.
Oh, really?
And I was
I
the
thought
first.
I was the last.
So probably I have. Oh, really? So
See, Eleonora is the first one.
So did I post a different program? Because I remember Africa was the. Okay, it's fine. So give me the order. So Eleonora, are you the first?
In the one I saw, but I don't know which one you published. For me, it's the same. I mean, just check.
Yes,
I mean,
I really don't mind, but I was the
either.
third one. But as you say, Alessandra, we don't really mind.
I don't know, because probably the one I post is an old version, but let me check because on Facebook
Okay.
I did post something. Okay. I mean, the one I have is right. I'm really tired. Yes, the one I have is Federici, Mazzara, and Vidal Claramonte. Right. Yes.
Okay.
But
So,
you know, I mean, I don't mind really. I mean, if you
I don't either.
so
No,
for
no,
me,
either, but I guess we need to follow the program. I'm
Yes.
okay with everything, but I guess people will have
Yeah.
seen.
Yes,
Okay.
let's follow
So-
the program.
Shall I close this?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
and fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
So shall I open mine?
Yes.
Just to be sure that it's already there.
But Africa, you have to close completely, otherwise Eleonora can't share the
Okay.
screen.
So fingers closed, really.
Yeah, that's why I said
I'm not sure about this at all, but anyway.
This is
But anyway, Alessandra, you have my PowerPoint, so.
Yeah.
Right.
I do. I don't remember where I put it. Let me see.
You want me to send it again?
No, let me check, because let me see if it is, maybe yes, because I have it in my laptop and I'm using my Mac.
Okay, I'll send it
So-
right now.
Yeah.
I think you're
Okay.
still sharing for Africa, no?
Am I? Sorry. Oh.
Ah,
No,
okay.
no, Eleonora is okay.
no, it's me, sorry.
No,
Ah,
it's
okay.
Okay.
So do
let's
you see
wait.
me or you see only my screen?
Well, we see the three of us. I can see the three of us on
Okay,
screen.
because I
not
have
see-
to, okay, but if I do that,
Okay.
you see my slides.
Yes. Yes. Now we see your slides. So
Okay,
leave
no,
your
I'll do that so I can say hello and then I'll go, yeah.
Right. Okay. So I just wait for Africa's presentation, and then in a few minutes we will start.
Sorry, what do you want me to do?
Just send me again.
sorry, I'm so,
Africa.
yes, I'm,
Yes,
yeah.
so I will just download it on my Mac.
Yeah. Yes, done.
Okay.
Did it reach you?
Not yet.
Hmm.
Let's do it. I don't know why, but I haven't received it yet.
Says send. Okay, I'll send it again, okay?
Okay, here it is. Got it.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. So just a second. That I did the download in a minute. Okay, I think it's 3 o'clock. I can see there are quite many colleagues and students here. So maybe it's time to start. Okay. Right. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here today. It's a great pleasure and it's my honor to launch the Spring School entitled Raccontare, le migrazioni, voci, narrazioni, testimonianze, telling migrations, voices, narrations, evidences within the context of the PhD in migration, differences and social justice. First of all, I would like to thank our coordinator, PhD coordinator, Professor Mari D'Agostino, for making all this possible through her energy, patience, and hard work. But our gratitude goes to the board all for the spirit of collaboration and continuous fruitful exchanges. This opening session is a special panel entitled Migration and Translation Across the Media and the Arts. And it is having three wonderful, fabulous speakers from three different universities. We have the University of Salamanca, we have the University of Ferrara, and we have the University of Westminster, based in Spain, Italy, and the United Kingdom, respectively. The topic of the panel aims, or at least attempts to testify to the wide role of translation, both as a broad and a narrow term, in relation to the representation of migration in terms of narration, in terms of re-narration, in terms of reframing through the arts, as well as in terms of counter-narrative with respect to the standardized stories appearing as news bulletin across the media and often marked by kind of traits of standardization, sensationalism, and compassion. I would like to start now introducing the first speakers with Eleonora Federici, but before introducing Eleonora, I would like to say that this panel is organized giving the floor to each speaker, and then we will have 10, maximum 15 minutes for questions or just simply comments. So please feel free to use the chat. And if you want, I can also unmute yourselves, and you can take the floor. So I would really feel happy for you asking questions and participate actively in the debate and make this event a bit more dynamic, of course, within the confines of the digital instrument we are using. Now, it's Eleonora's turn. Eleonora is associate professor at the University of Ferrara. She achieved a master and PhD at the University of Ao. And her main research areas are literary and LSP translation. In particular, Eleonora works in the context of the language of tourism and advertising, but also in the context of gender studies and feminist utopias and science fiction. She has published widely on specialized translation and gender, post-colonial translation, cultural representations in media, CDA in tourism and advertising text types. And she has also edited numerous journals, monographic issues, among which we have to remember a monographic number of the journal Island, entitled Identity, Language and Diversity with Africa and Rosario Martín Ruano. No, sorry, actually the journal was, the issue was Identity, Language and Diversity, right? And I think the title of the monographic issue was Translating and Interpreting Linguistic and Cultural Differences in a Migrant Era. And I had the pleasure to take part in this special issue. And then we have, she published in numerous, extensively in numerous prestigious academic and international journals. And her main books are The Translator as Intercultural Mediator, Translating Gender, Bridging the Gap Between Theory and Practice in Translation and Gender Studies, and Translation Theory and Practice, Cultural Differences in Tourism and Advertising. Eleonora is currently working on a volume on translation and translational texts, and among the many things she is carrying out and projects she continuously carries out, she's also practicing. She works as a specialized translator and as a literary translator. Now, the title of Eleonora's presentation today is Migrant Writers as Cultural Brokers, Translation and Self-Translation. Eleonora, it's really a pleasure for me to have you here. So thank you very much for accepting this invitation. The floor is yours. Maybe I can ask the two speakers, Federica and Africa, and myself to put our maybe camera off. And so she will be the only one on screen with her presentation, and also the mics.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you and all your colleagues for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with Africa and also with Federica, that I don't know personally, but I hope I will, not virtually as today in the future. So I'll go to my presentation. So I won't see you anymore, but we need to share the screen. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so yeah, I mean, thank you very much, because I went back to my work on writing, translation, and self-translation that I must say I had to leave apart for a while. So I'm very happy to be today here and retake this route and refollow some of the ideas. Well, I thought about a lesson, of course, for the PhD students. So I'm giving you my outline. So the beginning is starting from the relation between writing and translation. We know a lot has been said about it, but maybe I will give some bibliographical reference and information that could be useful for the PhD student. I'll then stop to some definition of specific term in order to understand my title about cultural brokers, and I'll give you some theoretical framework. And I decided to do something a bit different, because I could have talked about many things, of course, but I decided to work on one literary text, or well, a series, but I will just, of course, say something about it, don't worry, but to work on, well, it is a well-known example, because we know a lot about Gianpaolo Lahiri, but I thought it was interesting because she connects to a lot of the theoretical frameworks I'm going to talk about, and to talk about an Italian writer, but that she just published a book, actually, but that is mainly known for being a performer and a musician, and that because she uses a lot in a musical text English and not Italian, while the book that she has just written is in Italian, but I will tell you later on who she is, a bit of surprise. So the starting point, I try to sum up in this slide the fact that some kind of writing have been seen as metaphorical linguistic and cultural translation, especially in all the studies about writers coming or belonging to two or more different languages and culture. So a lot has been said about, multilingual and multicultural identities. And I would like to specify, as quite often for me, on the issue of gender and ethnicity today. That's why I also chose two women writers, because I think they have quite an important role in migratory waves, not only the two I'm talking about, but, thinking about a wider panorama in the Italian context of many women writers that write, for example, in Italian, with some reference also to their own mother tongue, and that are becoming more and more visible in the Italian publishing market. But, the starting point is that I have always found very fascinating the connection of writings and translations seen both as performative acts. Meaning that, as a writer and as a translator, or as a translator that you are also a writer and vice versa, that you are changing, creating, doing something, that you have the power of agency in the context where you are. So on the one end, we talk about writers in translation because they can play a social role, they can be active cultural agents, but on the other way, we also could talk about translators. We also could talk about how text and translation of this text into different language become potentially object of social change, or at least become a way, to rediscuss political, social issues connected, of course, to migration and not only. So going back, to touchstone books, I'm referring to Susan Basnett and Peter Bush, the translator as writer. I mean, as you can see, it's almost 2 decades that this book has been published, and a lot has been said about acts of writing, reading, translating that become too intertwining, let's say, roots. A lot has been said about canonical texts. Nowadays, we could say canonical texts like Eva Hoffman, for example, Lost in Translation, and the explanation of a life, in a new language, but also writing and self-translation as a kind of therapy in order to understand how to deal, let's say, with the new reality. So as you can see, it's already 2 decades that, these studies have been going on. And a bit a bit more recent, like 1 decade ago, and a bit more focused on translation studies. Are other works, like, for example, Loredana Poletti. She began writing these essay that I have outlining to you, Translation and Migration, but then she went on. So she went on analyzing translation as a form of writing and rewriting, but starting, from the wider perspective, meaning that, we can also talk about, writers like I'm doing today, but we can also talk about migrants, people that are actually agents of translation, of course, when they also have the power to control, of course, one or more languages. Otherwise, they need some intermediary, as we know. So translation is an active part in the lives of any migrant, in everyday practice. We know that. So, many of these studies, anyway, even if then they got to the literary text, to the literary example, but of course, they introduce the fact that, especially for health service in legal system, when migrants get to the new countries, they need someone that translates for them if they're not able to do on their own, but that their lives become entangled in translation act that are important in order to gain a place in the society that they are to be relocated, let's say, in the society that they get into it. So there are a lot of studies about language practices. And in a way, from these studies, a route has gone towards, language practices also in migrant writings. A very new publication by Karen van Dijk is about translingualism and translation, just being published. So you can Google and you can find it. You can find the PDF, so you can really read the entire research. And, it's another perspective in this kind of very wide umbrella term of translation and migrant writing, that she deals with migrants writer that engage in innovative linguistic practice, and this is something new, when language changes because we have new speaker, when we have all the interferences and inferences of other languages. And of course, all these studies are connected to the idea of movement, movement of people, movement of texts that have been translated, and so on and so forth. So I checked, the terms. I always begin with that in my research. So I wanted to see how many words that stand for concept I could find. And as you can see, you can see various definition for migration writing. And if we look at them a bit more carefully, we can see that in many cases the word that I use, are used to portray a literature of outsiders, not people that come from another place, that are not insiders, or they define literature in comparison, with another one, meaning the national one, or they define, migration as a keyword, but in, touching different domains of, any of us, any individual life. You have a very specific word with, a kind of flavor, religious flavor, like diaspora. You have other, like refugee, directly connected to politics. You have, immigrant, migrant, and many definitions, around the keywords of migration for, social, cultural aspect, etc. So I went back to the OID, and I tried to map out, the keywords that came to my mind, when you invited me. So I look at the dictionary, and I could see, that some words are kind of interlacing, as we could imagine. Like we know that migration defines movement of people from, different places to a new one. We know that translation is both, something practical, talking about texts that have been that are translated, either being written or spoken. But we also know that, in the past, it meant the process of moving something from one place to another. I mean, it's not used anymore, but in the back of this word, we also have, this definition. And then, of course, when we talk about cultural broker, we don't think about writer, we don't think about literary translator, because we think about people that are agent of change, that they try to build trust between people of different cultural systems, especially, in healthcare, in education, or, as I was saying, in the legal domain. So the idea is that you try to include, you talk about cultural inclusion, and you try to facilitate, the crossing of borders, not only physical borders, but cultural, linguistical border of person from one place, language, culture to another. So mainly, cultural broker are interpreter for other people, that they are intermediary, they are in between, because in many cases, as we know, migrants need the help of translator and interpreter. But they are not only linguistic intermediary, but they are intermediary of norms, of beliefs, of expectation of a group that, as share a common, we say, a common history, geography, and language. So this is our idea. So I went back to my idea, meaning, okay, is this possible to think that, writers are also cultural broker? Is it possible that people that are, well, we can define as migrant, but from another perspective, as we will see, are also cultural broker? I mean, do this writing, do this effort, acts of translation, also in between the lines of text, are helpful, to create a different idea also of migration, of migrants. So if you look at a general definition of migrant writing, we know that, first of all, we have informative accounts of the experience. So this kind of text should help us to understand, what happens to migrants when they get here. I was thinking about the Italian context. Of course, any context is different, but I was thinking about our own context. So what do we know about them? Not only what we hear in the news, but is it possible to hear from their own words, even if they are translated, or even if they self-translate themselves, what it is, to migrate, what it means to get in a place where, you are represented through stereotype, where, there are prejudices, of course, when sometimes also no violent reaction. We know that, so how these texts are important to see the representation of the migrant for the host country, but also for the home culture. And in many cases, that you have kind of main issues like identity, nationality, belonging, and these are the main ones. So when we talk about textual typology, I'm not referring only to literary text. No, we can have migrant writing that is not only literary, and this is what I find interesting. So, of course, the topic is the same, meaning, what emerges from the experience of migration. But if on the one hand we should enlarge the idea of the migrant writer, it's not only a migrant, but could be someone that experiences migration anyway, that passes through and then migrates to another place. And third, we can think about texts that are not only literary. That's why I've chosen a comic book as a second example. So even if we know we have different textual typology, the main feature in many cases includes the same topic, like real life, multilingualism and creolization of languages, references, of course, to different culture, geographic location, and a red thread is the idea that the act of translation is visible. It becomes a metaphor for the person, a metaphor for what happens, a metaphor for what is their everyday life. So I'm gonna show you now some theoretical perspective that can help, in any analysis of a literary or non-literary text defined as migrant, let's say, migrant. We could say migrant experience text, okay? So I'm referring to the scholar that actually was my standpoint when with Africa and Rosario and Rosie, we decided not to work on translation and migration in this monographic issue. So Doris Bachmann-Medic, that is a culturalist, because she does cultural studies, and also she does a lot of sociological research, sometimes even ethnographic anthropological research. So she's not a pure either a literary scholar nor a pure linguist, but all her work turns around the idea of translation, and not only migration. I mean, this is what is interesting for us today, but the idea of translation in a wider sense. She's the one that created the term translational turn that then was used, okay, also in translation studies. Because she said, now the category of translation from a linguistic and textual paradigm must be disengaged. It is a cultural practice, okay? It is in the sphere of social action, so it is a vital action. I mean, there are many books that you can read written by Bachmann-Medic, and that is a sort of, if you look from the beginning of a work on translation and migration to the most recent one, it's a kind of developing history on, translation as an analytical category in order to recontextualize, cultural text. And she says cultural text, meaning not only literary text, but, other cultural typologies. And of course, I mean, she's very much theoretical. So she talked about, transcultural epistemic spaces, where, you should open to an idea of knowledge and, yes, and also learning, I would say education, is something that crosses the boundaries. And she's the one that actually talk about cultural broker. So actually, I must admit, that I refer to her once again, because she said, that if we have to develop new frameworks in a world that is changing because of global migration. So we have to think about, the condition, the laws, the cultural and political encounter, but we also have to widen, okay, our idea, both of translation, both of what really migration involves, okay, in our life, not only the migrant life, but also in our life. So she talks about not only cultural broker as interpreter and translator, but also migrant writer, okay, as cultural broker, meaning that, through their actions, so also through the agency in their writing, something happens. There are spaces of self-assertion. And what I found interesting, that I think, give us a very interesting way of thinking about as theorist of translator, but also as translator, are the models that she offer. You know, she offer, as you can see, different models. I'm not reading them. I mean, you can look at the slide, but you know, she explained that, you know, you can have different models of integration that could be either, you know, the way a country decide to assimilate people, not through dominant norms of their society, or a model of self-translation that anyway is a kind, again, of, you know, appropriation, but, you know, it is different according to the fact of addressing, you know, the home country or the host country. And then she talked about a model between multilingualism, you know, multilingual condition that is very much more visible, you know, in as I was saying, in contexts like, you know, healthcare and so on. I mean, when you have access to some services that are important, of course, for your everyday life. But then she talks also about the models of reference as a third idiom. I mean, there is a lot, you know, when we talk about third, we remember also Omi Baba and the third space, of course, but she talks about refugees, how we represent them, how, you know, we translate them also, you know, in the image that we have in their words, but not only, also what happens to refugees when they get to another place. So, you know, metaphorically speaking, but also very practical speaking about people's life. And then I think she says something very interesting connected to writing. I think that, you know, you can transform, you know, you can relocate yourself instead of talking about, you know, this location. Of course, she's not the only one. I mean, if we look at translation studies theories, we have many of them that have worked on translation and migration theory in trying to, you know, to discuss the issue from a theoretical perspective. The first that probably you all know is Michael Cronin, you know, and beginning again 2 decades ago with, you know, translation as an integral part of the evolution of cultures, okay, of as a powerful tool to enhance difference, to promote intercultural dialogue. More recent, I think, you know, again, if you Google it, you can see it, you can watch it in YouTube. Maureen Guilleri has worked on translation and migration, and she has talked about, you know, the semiotics of migrant visibility. So working, of course, on, you know, also news and the representation. I mean, on the issue of representation, I was just talking about, but it means, you know, that the presence of the absence of translation in situation of migratory movement makes a difference. Now, the importance we give, okay, to translation, and we recognize to translation, make us probably understand the migrant subject, no, in a different way. I also found in the last day when I was looking at new publication for this talk, that a literary scholar, Mary Jacobus, just wrote a volume entitled On Belonging and Not Belonging, Translation, Migration and Displacement. And I must say that I didn't like at all, okay, the last term, displacement, because I thought, again, you know, okay, it's, well, I didn't read it yet, so I can talk properly about it, you know, but I just look at the title, you know, and title make us think about what comes after, no, in the volume. And I thought, well, why in 2022 we still have to talk about displacement? I mean, if we are talking mainly about, you know, migrant literary writers, well, we could talk about, yes, relocation, you know, and new placement instead, again, of displacement. Otherwise, it's always, you know, a very specific point of view that we assume again. And that's why I thought, okay, so we are still in a wave of writing about, you know, multilingual, multicultural writer that, yes, write aside the nation, as Adesayan said, you know, 20 years ago, and we are still connecting, you know, translation to the idea of transnationalism. That I must say, you know, until a few years ago, I was very happy to read about it. No, I was convinced, you know, that the connection of the term trans, you know, translation and transnational could be helpful in order to understand how to work as translator first, but also so how to translate, you know, literary texts that were immersed, in different languages and culture, but also as a way to think about, migrants and migratory flow in a different way. But if I must say now, I have a bit changed my mind. I mean, a lot of people, discuss it in translation, like Dalima Costa also. She said, okay, we think about writers and translators that live, in the interstices, they are perennially displaced and so on and so forth. And at the beginning I thought, okay, so maybe it is a way, to deconstruct this massive study on word literature that I never liked, because there is always a very Western specific Anglophone idea about, word literature. I mean, if you look at or global literature, I mean, at least in my perspective, if you look at some of the work in the list that you can see in my slide, I mean, who chooses, who are the word literary text, and from which context, and is it possible to find translator that can translate from other language? Another thing that I didn't like at all, was the term minority, minority literature, minority language, and so on and so forth. Now, I must admit, I was hooked, okay, in the transnational movement, also for my interest in translation and gender, as it was said before. So, but I must say, that if you look at the words that you see in this slide, from Sonia Alvarez to Olga Castro to Ron Flotter, etc., at least you can see, that a lot of the work has been done in an idea of, opening and collaboration that goes beyond the Western world, especially von Flotter decided to co-edit different books with scholars that were from completely different contexts in order to open up, to talk about other contexts and other kind of writers and translators. So I must admit that I use the term transnational also in the publication with José Sant'Emilia. But the idea was, to talk about the transnational as a way of dialogues among, translators from different places, or how we translate, text, not only literary, any kind of text, from different contexts, and how can we do it? So it was a way to, let's say, go beyond, but if I still read the displacement, if I still read, this kind of study, I think we are, well, a lot of the research is still going on in a certain direction that at least I think intersected, with all these studies about self-translation. Again, I have written a list. I'm not reading. I'm not reading all the title, because you can look at them. I mean, I can also leave the slide. I mean, to Alessadra, of course, to share it. No problem. So you can find these titles. But this was at least about someone that was talking about himself or herself, and it was a kind of reflection about switching languages and so on and so forth. So I'm going to the first example, otherwise I don't have time to say much. So why was I interested in Lairi? Well, I was interested because I found, I'm not talking about that today, but I found that, you have certain authors that are really marketed in a certain way, like Lairi has been. Of course, she came to Italy, so she was here, so she was very visible. She also participated probably to many literary and cultural events. So, of course, we know more about her than about, other writers that didn't of course didn't make the same choices. But I also think that around a figure as a writer, especially in the Italian context, a lot has been done in order to create a marketing, okay, for Gianpa Lairi, and not about maybe many other writers, that could be interesting, equally interesting. But anyway, she is interesting because translation and migration are a core of their writing. She's been again, analyze. A lot have been written about her being, between different cultures. The themes of a text are about that. No, they are about borders, crossing the border, new languages, etc. No, in almost any of her book, she creates this figure of the translator, of the interpreter, that sometimes is mirroring herself, sometimes is not. But anyway, so, the character of the translator, of the interpreter is there. It's a kind of meta translation novel, we could say. But I was looking, at the fact that she also wrote essay, right? So she wrote about being migrant, let's say, more from Bengal to the US than, of course, to Italy, but talking about, her own fiction as immigrant fiction, okay? Her own fiction as, a kind of an act of self-translation. And, as you can see, this I always felt it was interesting because she goes back, like myself, to terms and say, through which acronym, she was identified. Then, of course, if you read works, you see that, first of all, it's interesting because she writes directly, she writes in Italian, so she writes in Italian, that is not her language. She writes in Italian while she is in Italy. She, at the beginning, she decided not to translate herself, okay, but, to ask someone else, to edit her own writing. She publishes a lot about, needing a different language, needing a new way of expression. So this is something I have to say. I chose a high-class migrant. I know that, okay? I know that she is very well educated, that she came to Italy because she loved probably the language, the culture. So she's not a migrant, in our mind. We have another idea also of migrant writers, people that come for political reason, for, because they need to find a job, for religious reasons. So of course she is a kind of high-class migrant, but what is interesting is that, she talks about in the acquisition of a language, the writing into a new language as a kind of process. A process to knowing herself. Okay, so if as Italian reader, okay, we read that, probably, I thought, I don't know if you agree, you will tell me, no, maybe also reader will understand how difficult it is for any of us, even for a highly educated person, to learn another language, to know how to express herself, So if you look at, the topic, they're all about feelings, they're all about, a new language being a new life, a rebirth. So it's a kind of very, for translator and translation studies scholar, she uses, let's say, she uses metaphor that are very well known, about translation. Also, translation has been said to be a kind of rebirth. But I think, it's interesting. You see that in the acquisition of the language goes hand by hand to where, living the everyday life. And, we know she's, anyway, she's in a very good position, okay, compared to other people. Now, the last one, Dove mi trovo, was written in Italian. Well, I suppose she was, it was edited, but, was written directly in Italian. So the word that you see in the slide here in English are mine. Actually, is the book has been published, okay, has been published into English, but I haven't analyzed, comparatively the two texts, but I have seen, how all the language was about, something that we connect to migration, the idea of being disoriented, uncertain, to be lost, to be isolated, to be bewildered, to be confused. So I found it was quite interesting. And I thought, okay, maybe, this could be anyway useful for someone that, wants to think about, at least to try to think about it. I won't say anything about the closing of books, but you can probably look at this book because it's very small. I mean, you can read it very easily. It was a lecture, but I'm going on because I want to tell you that, you know, when we talk about writing in Italian, it's not only Giampallaire, you know. These are some of migrant writers that are known in Italy. Of course, there are more how can I say? I mean, of course, scholar that write on Italian migrant writer can analyze it better than myself. That I'm not an Italianist, but you know, if you look at this work and the translation into English, they're very much similar. I mean, the themes are very much similar, and they connect what they do in you know, in everyday life to the acquisition of language. Okay, so this is something that it's important, no? Like words are sometimes like stones, says Geneviève Macapin. No? She says, I have to deconstruct words, I have to limit the use of my words. And this is something, you know, when we read that, we think that we understand, you know, that people have to deal with the new language when they speak to us, you know, when they speak in the new context. Now, I want to show you the comic book by Anna Maria Guenier that is more known for with the name of Karima 2G, that stands for second generation. That is of Liberian origin, but she was born in Rome. Why that? Because I thought, you know, we talk about migration, but we should think also about, you know, writers that are Italian, you know, that are born in Italy, and that, of course, they give us a kind of mirror perspective about us. And I thought, well, this is a good example because we go beyond literature. You know, if you Google Karima 2G, you find a lot of YouTube links. I wanted to show it to you, but I couldn't. And I don't know, because maybe I'm not very good technologically. I admit that, but maybe, you know, because they have music right, probably you know, we can't at least I couldn't click and copy the link. Okay, but if you want to enjoy yourself, you can go and listen to Bunga Bunga, for example, that you understand immediately what it is about, even if some years have gone by, but Berlusconi is still unfortunately in our mind, or other. I must acknowledge that one of our colleagues, Antonia Tarona, wrote about it, the use of English about this artist, we could say, because she's not only a writer, she's an artist, first of all. Then she has published a book, but very recent, to 2022. I don't want to talk about, you know, Pidgin English and the way she decided to write in English, but it's interesting because I think, okay, who's going to understand it? You know, I mean, I don't know if you can read it, you know, but the comic book, of course, is very simple. It's like a children drawing, so it's not, let's say, the aesthetical part that is important, but it's important that she talks about education. So the fact that at school, you know, the math teacher was called Edda, named after Edda Mussolini, and then of course she pretends not to recognize. No, she doesn't pretend. She doesn't recognize migrant children in her class. Then she goes by to another stereotype. Now, like if you are a black girl standing at the bus stop, you are a prostitute. No, as you can see. So it's interesting because I'm thinking, okay, who's going to read it, you know, in English and not in Italian? Because this is the other question that, of course, I was thinking about. Very interesting if we analyze English language, a bit less, you know, if we think about, okay, but are Italian reading, okay, this comic book? And then, as you can see, you know, these are only some part of the comic book, of course, not some pages, not all of them. She talks about, you know, language. She talks about solid citizenship. So, but at least apart from, you know, looking at the drawing that is aliens, you know, a very simple, I could draw the very similarly because I'm not good at all. So aliens that are talking, you know, and they are talking about something that is still difficult, okay, to talk about. And she also, I'm sorry, yeah, no, yes, stop. And then also she finishes this comic book with a quotation from Nelson Mandela. And on the other side, she writes, she asserts why she wanted to use a comic book, but she didn't say why she presented it in English. So to conclude, to go back to my question, I mean, can an Anglophone writer writing in Italian change our perspective about migration and migrants? Can we understand the difficulty of learning a new language, reading our own writing? Can we understand how people should adapt to new values, new norm, even if they're highly educated? So imagine if they are not. Can voices of migrant writers, like the one I just show very fast to you, open our eyes about equality, inclusion, and the difficulty, to be part of a new context, to be included, and not displaced? Or is the work of a second generation, like Karimaji, they make us think about the perception not only of migrant, but also people that were born and bred in Italy, and sometimes we still do not consider them as Italians. Yeah, the only thing that makes me think about is that all these publications were in English. But the last publication, I mean, the book that she does publish, is in Italian. So this probably is different. So I think, that, yes, I think that writers or any artist, anyone that make us think about the different way of talking about translation, self-translation, migration can be broker or can be breakers if you want to play with words. And I think that this act of translation are necessary to make us look at our world through a different perspective, because I think that translation should help us to relocate people, to relocate human being, and from passages from one place to the other, from one language to the other, and not to displace them. And I close, so we have time to discuss.
Thank you, Eleonora. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was really, really a fascinating and inspiring piece of research. So I really enjoyed it. Let's say that John Palairi is my old, maybe first love. When I read all her novels, The Interpreter of Maladies was amazing, I remember, and it's really, really inspiring. So thank you.
Sorry, it was my alarm.
It's fine. It's fine. No, you are you perfectly respected the time. So thank you very much. So thank you for this dense cultural, linguistic, literary overview of the relation between translation and migration through writing processes. I would say that translation is really used today as an umbrella term, an incredible umbrella term, embracing a variety of processes and involving numerous activities and movements and shifts, referring to migration, transition, etc. So I don't want to steal any time, and I'd like to ask the audience if they have questions, if there are comments. I mean, please don't be shy. You can write via chat, and if you want, I can also unmute, and you can show your face, so we can make this this panel more dynamic, as I said at the beginning.
Sorry, I just say something because I didn't say the title. The title of the book is Il Corpo Nero.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
So just to tell you.
Yes. Thank you very much. Anyone?
I just wanted to say that maybe we can collect questions later. What do you think, Ale?
Well,
can we do that?
I mean, it's fine. At the beginning, I just said that I would after each talk. But it's fine. I mean, if we want to do at the very end, yes, why not?
It was a lot of food for thought. So as far as I'm concerned, I need to process it, and it's wonderful. But yeah, I will have questions later. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe let's do it later. Eleonora, because I also have quite many questions and also comments. So we can just do it at the end. And now I would like to invite. So thank you very much, Eleonora.
It's okay. I want to be sure that you don't see my screen anymore.
At the moment, we can see your face. So just
Perfect.
turn off your camera. And we should be ready for, yes, okay. Right, so we have now the second speaker of this panel today. He's Federica Mazzara. Federica is an associate professor in cultural studies at the University of Westminster. And she received an MA in translation studies and comparative literature from the University of Essex. And she also had a PhD in comparative literature at the University of Naples. She carried out a project on migration and culture when she was at University College London, where she was also program director for the BA in Languages and Culture and also for the MA in Gender, Society and Representation. Her main research interests include migration, the arts and politics, media and communication, and in particular, her research interrogates contemporary approaches in Europe regarding migration as represented in cultural practices. She has published extensively in international journals and also in edited volumes. And among her major publications is Reframing Migration, Lampedusa Border Spectacle and Aesthetics of Subversion, which I guess will be a central topic in our presentation today. Federica also co-curated an exhibition on the subject of migration death at sea called Seek Without Trace, an exhibition which took place in London in 2019. The title of our presentation today is Reframing Migration. I'm very happy to welcome Federica to this e-panel. Federica is a very dear friend of mine and also colleague. So Federica, thank you very much for being here with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First of all, can you hear me and can you see my slides?
We can. But your slides are not in the full screen modality.
Yeah, I know. I'll just start it
okay,
when I just say thank you. Pretty much. That's really you went really a long time back, Ale, to the MA. That was a really long time ago. Thank you for this generous introduction. Thanks for having me. Thank you to Maria D'Agostino, of course, and to the rest of the team. And welcome back to our PhD students. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm sure there'll be time for discussion and to turn this into a really interesting interactive conversation. So in line to what has been presented so far, I will also address issues of discourse. So it's of course, it was a textual discourse with the previous presentation. Mine is especially related to the visual, and a little bit of a trigger warning because I'll be talking about death. That's one of my specific topics in my latest research. There'll be images, not graphic. I don't use graphic images, but surely upsetting. And but of course, generally speaking, it is very upsetting in general terms. Migration nowadays, it has become an incredibly dark topic. So just to warn you that I will make reference to things related to that. So starting my presentation now. So within this presentation, I want to first of all address very generally the management of death at sea in Europe, and we could, of course, extend to UK today, considering what is happening in the UK channel. And of course, this is affecting me a bit more directly, living in London and being exposed to now another interesting narrative around this other new crisis, as they like to call it. And then I will look at those strategies of reframing. That's the term that I came up with when I published my book on reframing migration. So I'll try to contextualize in relation to my case studies. So reframing this narrative that we have digested over time through several mainstream media, and look at different alternative platforms. So Ale, please let me know when I have reached my time. I don't get offended if you interrupt me. I really don't like to go over time. So for at least the last past 3 decades, maybe even 40 soon, migrants crossing the sea via unauthorized routes have been, as we know, victims of shipwrecks in one of the most recent human relocations. And we're talking about Europe in the specific context. That has been a desired destination for many people. Today, people watching news, reporting on migrant death at sea have definitely become desensitized towards what should be definitely an avoidable daily human loss. The increasing enforcement of EU and UK borders has seen member countries also making agreement with third countries. We know about the Libya-Italy agreement, but there's also the Turkey-EU agreement, there's the UK-Rwanda agreement, to handle what, from the perspective of Europe and UK, is an unmanageable mass migration, unmanageable between inverted commas, and of course, so-called refugee crisis, terms that I never used myself, and I actually, if I use them in context of, critical context. So these drastic measures carried out without first assessing the human rights standard in those countries have inevitably intensified the risk of death and have certainly not prevented the loss at sea. So, of course, sorry, there is an image from the current situation in Libya, for instance. That's the detention center for migrants in Libya. And to add to this already dreadful situation, the lack of regulation that related to the recovering and consequently identification of migrant corpses, so those who lose their lives while crossing dangerous borderlands, often liquid borders, has turned the Mediterranean, Aegean Sea, and UK channel into graveyards for thousands of nameless and unclaimed bodies of water, to use a very, very interesting definition by Joseph Pugliese. Data on the victims of the illegalized journeys available to the general public is largely sourced from news media, which of course raises doubt about the reliability, while there are no official death tolls. So within this frame of vulnerability, victims of shipwrecks of an unauthorized journey can be said to fall under the category of ungrievable lives, and I'm here using Judy Butler's term, which refers to lives that cannot be lost and cannot be destroyed because they already inhabit a lost and destroyed zone. So they are ontologically and from the start already lost and destroyed. So I think this is a very, very deep thought and super interesting in context, of course, of ideology around migration. Even the strategies of the burial of recovered bodies adopted in places that receive these corpses of shipwreck victims corroborate the fact that grieving the migrant lost lives is not a recognized and respected practice. Rarely, for instance, are these corpses allowed a coffin. And if they are, it is often in response to strategies of spectacularization revolving around events that require an opportunistic humanitarian parade from institutions. This was the case, for instance, of the 3rd of October, with the 3rd of October 2013 shipwreck off the coast of Lampedusa, which caused the death of at least 368 Eritreans. And on that occasion, there was a state funeral. This is a picture taken on that day, to which very interestingly and sadly, the survivors were actually not admitted. So there's always this kind of like double treatment. So there's at times that the dead people receive more respect than those who survived the journey, but it's only on very rare occasion, and this was arranged in the island of Lampedusa in order to allow for a parade of governmental representatives. 10 years later, just a few weeks ago, we are yet again witnessing pretty much the same event, this time in Crotone, just a few weeks ago, another shipwreck where 67 and possibly more people have lost their lives, as we know. And this is another interesting picture, and I want to take, I mean, of course, there's so much to unpack and deconstruct in semiotic terms, but one element in particular struck my attention, which is, of course, the flags. We have the Italian and the European Union flag, of course, that represent the government involved in what, from their perspective, is the commemoration, a commemoration moment. But at the same time, of course, it's undeniable that it is quite a contrasted picture in the sense that we have the government representative and the countries involved are those who are also responsible for these loss of life. So it's really a schizophrenic and very, very problematic representation. An image that has been circulated on social media, of course, on the news. All I've read about this picture is how nice of the President Mattarella to attend this commemoration day. So in such cases, the dead are pretty much instrumentalized for political purposes to justify policies of repression and border militarization, which are very often sold as humanitarian missions. But bodies of water, in fact, do not usually end up in coffins and are certainly not offered state funerals. So plastic bags are the most common destinations of these ungrievable and untraceable bodies. This is one of the many photographs taken in Lampedusa after another tragic shipwrecks. While numbers used to identify them what numbers are used to identify them when they are interred in unmarked mass graves, and these are some examples. This is a mass grave of migrants, victims of shipwrecks in attempts to cross unauthorized routes. This is Sidiro in Turkey, Lesbos, Greece, Reggio Calabria, and Palermo. Very similar strategy, and details on these captions are very vague, often just the term unidentified. I will get back to this when I'll talk about the artistic response to especially this aspect. So those who are never recovered, of course, are left to decompose at the bottom of the sea. So while the response to migrant death should be similar to that for death in commercial air crashes, shipwrecks, or humanitarian disasters, where immediate steps are taken to count the dead, to record the missing, to identify the victims, to interview the survivors and preserve evidence, as Stephanie Grant, lawyer Stephanie Grant observes. This does not happen in the case of victims of unauthorized journeys, where the dead are considered actually responsible for their own destiny, sadly. So there are not really systematic methods in place for identification of corpses, or at least not regular, not consistent. So the way migrant loss at sea is managed by the violent European border regime respond to what Bembe has defined as an necropolitical condition, the subjugation of migrant life to the power of death. That's what it is. So in other words, sovereignty is perceived as a way to exercise the right to kill. Which must be considered as part of the strategy of subjugation resulting from more than 500 years of empire, colonial conquest, and slavery. We're still continuing that kind of narrative and story. So we are simply witnessing a new declination of an old and repressed issue. Now, the necropolitical approach is generally supported and justified by the reiteration of the above-mentioned patterns of political and juridical discourse that is fueled, of course, by mainstream media, as it was mentioned before, that participate to the enticing fabrication of what Nicolas de Genovese defined the border spectacle, a term that I've used extensively also in my book, where migrant bodies are completely de-individualized as human beings and, of course, treated as a threat. So death is, in fact, presented as a regular feature of illegalized migration, almost as a kind of naturalized phenomenon that has become pretty much acceptable, bearable even, because it's portrayed as an ineluctable consequence of the impossibility of coping with what, as I defined before, is considered an unmanageable crisis. So given these really sad context, which is really difficult to sort of challenge because it's established and because it's constantly and consistently informing political decisions to be taken and to regulate human movement. It is really important and urgent to think about alternatives. So those who are like us interested in social justice and in strategies of communication of social justice, I've done quite a lot of work in sort of rethinking categories and translated, to use a term that is important today. These new thinking into words and image that hopefully can address and raise a different type of awareness around these issues. So given the reiteration of the above strategy that is causing the death of many, it is absolutely crucial to find these alternatives. Alternatives gaze, I would say, as actually Sandro Mezzadra also addressed them, it talks about a gaze, to look at and talk about the current phenomenon of human relocation. So migrant death at sea can be addressed within politics of dissensus and subversions. They go beyond compassion and fetishization of the other, and where the affective identification is not necessarily the desired outcome and response. So I'm also very keen to address this whole issue of humanitarianism as well, and to really consider how compassion, pity, and everything that might inform what is considered a drastically opposite approach to the governmental one, how much actually these other alternative narratives is able to subvert this more hegemonic narrative. So we need to be careful as well with those categories of compassion and humanitarianism, because there is a tendency, of course, to approach the migrant and asylum seekers or the refugees in a kind of paternalistic way, reiterating again sort of colonial relationships. So we need to question those as well. So artistic responses to migrant death at sea can produce, I think, an important and radical alternative to the necropolitical condition. And not all the artistic responses. I've analyzed various artworks in the past decade, and I mean, there are certainly some approaches to the issue of migration I've disagreed with, and I'd be happy to explain why. One of those is Ai Weiwei, for instance, who is an acclaimed international artist, and I really like Ai Weiwei, but I really dislike his approach when it comes to migration. There won't be time to show you here, but possibly this will come back in the discussion. So, but there is potential. There is potential for the artistic platform, which becomes also an activist platform, to propose a radical alternative to this necropolitical condition, by engaging in acts of contestations of those practices that conceal the violence of borders. So a starting point for the following discussion is the conviction that artistic engagements are in fact increasingly developing spaces for subversive practices. I will here look at two specific artworks which were displayed at the London exhibition Sink Without Trace, which took place in July 2019. And this was an exhibition that I co-organized with Maya Ramsey, a London-based artist. And the exhibition has brought together artists with different backgrounds, with a shared interest in responding and problematizing the pressing issue of migrant death at sea. They also puts together several artists who have firsthand experienced the unauthorized passage and crossing of liquid borders. The exhibition was a result of several years of research. One of the main outcomes related to it was my monograph, as Alessadra mentioned, called Reframing Migration, Lampedusa, Border Spectacle and Aesthetics of Subversion, that somehow sets the theoretical framework, because I explore how activist art forms have become a platform for subverting the dominant narrative of migration. Many of the work analyzed in the book were ended up being part of the exhibition. So alongside this theoretical approach, Maya Ramsey conducted fieldwork in Sicily for her art project called Countless, which I will present in a second, which includes a series of 30 graphite rubbings from the graves of 30 migrants who died at sea while trying to reach Europe and are now buried in several Sicilian cemeteries. So the combination of these two approaches, mine and Maya's, led us to explore the possibility of developing a public initiative that could trigger a different narrative around the topic of migrant death at sea. So this is how the idea of Sink Without Trace took root, and the decision to focus on this particular topic came as a realization that even if migration has been highly popularized subject in the arts in recent years, there has been a lack of engagement with this whole dimension of necropolitics. So galleries and museums have largely focused on other, less harrowing aspects of migration. So Maya and I decided to instead offering a different narrative around this specific topic. So this is another, it's a screenshot from Al Jazeera covering the exhibition. The exhibition was incredibly well covered in the press. And there is a reason as well connected to this, which I hope I have time to present, and it has to to the fact that at the same time at the Venice Biennale, there was an exhibition that was somehow linked to this topic, and our exhibition in a way wanted to challenge that installation. So I hope I'll have time to tell you all about this, but let me for now start with the first artworks, which is Maya Ramsey, Countless, so-called, which, as I mentioned, is an example, of course, of the censors and subversions. And he specifically addresses the practice of recovering and identification of bodies and the consequent burial and gravability, or actually lack of. They can make viewers more aware and, as a result, more prone to engage in a critical reading of both acts of criminalization of migration and sentimental politics. So Countless, as I mentioned, comprises 30 graphite rubbings. That's in the photographs here. Maya is carrying out the rubbing, graphite rubbing of one of them from the graves of unnamed migrants who lost their lives in the Sicilian Channel, highlighting the fact that it was 30 years since the first recorded migrant shipwreck in European water. So Maya wanted to choose a symbolic number, not just a random one. So the grave rubbings are on tissue paper that they were later framed in perspex, and that's how they've been displayed and during the exhibition, as if to emulate a dignified marble headstone that sadly so few of them have. Out of the 200 migrant graves that Maya visited, only 2 had been identified, and less than 10 had a headstone. So the rubbings are exhibited alongside photographic images and video footage of the graves, boats, and further information on the subject. So it's a quite comprehensive project. In Countless, what Maya tries to do is to apply a strategy of memorialization in a migratory context. So once again, the necropolitical space targeted is Sicily and its cemeteries, but it could, of course, apply to many other borderlands that are affected by similar stories. So the cemeteries where most of the corpses which are recovered from the shipwrecks in the Mediterranean, especially those happening close to Lampedusa, are buried. So as noted above, within the context of the recent migratory crossing, the sea victims, if recovered, become victims yet again, this time of the negligent system that is supposed to manage the identification and burial, but actually it's really not doing a great job. In Sicily, there is no norm or law that regulates the identification and burial of victims of the sea. And to complicate the traceability of the bodies even further, there's not an official registry that is kept on the island to record the death and personal detail of the victims. The system is quite random, lacks standardization. I went with Maya to the cemetery in Palermo, and it took us half a day to find where these graves were, because they just couldn't find it. They showed a map. They said it should be around here. They came with us. They just couldn't find it. So it took really many hours. As a result, the data inscribed on graves is, of course, itself quite vague. The like numbers on metal cross, which at times, if they've been identified as Muslims, might have the 2 sides bent. Of course, there have been incredible efforts around this, and I want to mention what Giorgia Mirto, a researcher from Palermo as well, who is now not in Palermo, but she has worked extensively on this issue. She has done an incredible job trying to identify, for instance, some of these graves. And she says, and I quote, "Unidentified cadavers are usually registered according to the label they are given in the documents by police, coroners, or the civil servants of the Stato Civile. So, for instance, unknown number 1 or immigrant who died in Lampedusa. But sometimes the police and coroner give different labels to the bodies, and the cemeteries may also have their own system for recording the unidentified migrants buried there. So you can see that there is actually not a system. So this is exactly what Maya Ramsey experienced in her search, as I mentioned, and she went to look for those graves in Palermo, Agrigento, Porto Empedocle, and Siculiana, and that happened in the summer of 2016. In other cases, the local municipality actually has made an incredible effort to secure a dignified burial for those unknown deaths. So there are lots of spontaneous acts of memorializing, which of course are happening also in other parts of the world. I'm thinking about Tunis as well, from which the families of the identified victims are usually excluded, however, because they are not permitted to travel, for instance, from the home countries of the deceased. But at least they try to compensate for the inefficacy of the system. So these practices of making spontaneous mourning are indeed aimed at counterbalancing the necropolitical strategies of the deletion of migrant life and death adopted by the government through what Maurice Stirl has defined as grief activism. That's an interesting definition and concept. Again, I don't have time to unpack everything, but I'm happy to provide more details, maybe possibly bibliographical as well. So the rubbings of the graves made by Ramsey are meant to critically address the approximation of data used to identify the victims. The graves are placed very close to each other, especially the ones in Palermo, suggesting that maybe the bodies might have belonged to children, while others are marked by just a small cross, and only 2 of the bodies, as I mentioned, were identified, and the name of the victims were inscribed on the marble stone in the native language, Arabic. Ramsey's approach to memorialization intends to subvert the marginality by using a strategy of remembrance that provocatively recalls the one practiced also around war memorials, such as the US Vietnam Veterans Memorial, where visitors copy by rubbing the name of a family member or friend who died during the Vietnam War. So such rubbings also function as personal souvenirs commemorating a visit, in the case of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. But of course, the rubbing practice also responds to a much longer artistic history of making rubbing, so also called frottage, as Max Ernst and the Surrealists called it. So Maya explains that the point of the work, and I quote, is to try to bring the migrants' graves closer to people who will not ever seen them, to bring the subject closer, to make it more tangible rather than it being just about abstract numbers. So, and I close quote, so the artist opted for the graphite rubbing technique as the least invasive and most respectful way of making a work about the subject. And this was exactly generally the purpose of Sink Without Trace, which was to bring the people closer to the issue of migrant death at sea, beyond what they would be normally exposed to through the media. And of course, we are also mainly talking about a British public in that specific case, where, of course, there might be even less, the proximity might be even less stronger, let's say, than people possibly more closer to the Mediterranean, as has been the case for people living in the south, in Greece, for instance, or in the southern Italy, and of course, the UK channel is now bringing really the issue much closer. Ale, how much time do I have?
You actually have 10 minutes left.
10 minutes, okay.
Left. If you want, you can just stop now. I mean, it's up to you. But you have maximum 40 minutes. So if you want, you still have 10 minutes left.
Let's see. I might just quickly. I'll show you quickly the second work that I want to present that addresses similar aspects of migrant FSC, which are unveiled by Ramsey and Countless. But here I'm referring to the photographic series by Italian photojournalist Max Hirzel called Migrant Bodies, which I think I also mentioned previously in my intervention last time, which is documenting, again, the management of migrant corpses in Sicily. This series originated when Hirzel met Alpha, who was a young man from Cameroon, and he told Max, in the desert, I saw a grave. They told me it was of a girl from Douala, and I wonder if her parents knew that their baby was there. So Hirzel started this sort of like exchange that trigger this desire to explore more the issue of corpses, and especially in relation to the families. So I wanted to know where and how they are buried, and how many of them have been identified. So he put together a series of photographs, and the whole project is called Migrant Bodies, which can be seen entirely on the website. His name is Max Hirzel. And he was a very, very important part of our exhibition. So we put together a video. We organized this image into a looped video, and people could sit in front of the screen and just observe these pictures with captions explaining what they were about. But most of these pictures are those taken from a very, very rare forensic cases investigation that has been carried out on corpses from the so-called boat of innocence, the boat of innocence shipwreck, 18th of April 2015, and that's the boat on the image. This is an article from The Guardian that was written about our exhibition, and was specifically focusing on Max Hirzel, especially because of the relation with the Venice Biennale. So the shipwreck happened in 2015 in the area between Libya and the Sicilian city of Augusta, and it was caused by a collision with a Portuguese freighter who was actually there to rescue the boat in distress. Now, this shipwreck caused between 700 and 1,100 deaths, while only 28 people survived. So it was an incredible, dramatic and tragic shipwreck. So the shipwreck was recovered a year after. It was quite a difficult operation. I'm not arguing that, but it took a year before the Italian government decided to invest on this operation. And a quite harrow detail from the belly of the boat. You can see there is a little window. 450. The fragments of 450 bodies were recovered. So this boat was then taken to the Sicilian NATO naval base at Melilli, where the bodies still trapped in the boat's hull were removed. So due to this unprecedented number of deaths involved in the shipwreck and the consequent publicity, the Italian authorities decided to carry out forensics of all of these 450 bodies, a job carried out by Cristina Cattaneo, director of Labanov, and we have a representative from that from that center as part of the PhD. And Hirzel was the only photographer who was admitted to this incredible operation. So he was there to document this unprecedented operation. So it goes a bit beyond the simple documentation of the forensics migrant bodies, because he also wants to uncover the stories of some of those involved, including, for instance, Mohammed Matouk is on the third image to the right, the first line, who is a Syrian lawyer who traveled from Damascus to collect the belongings of his brother and to visit his grave once the body had been identified. Or he also brings the story of Mamadou in South Senegal, the family of another traveler who lost his life in the shipwreck. So it's more than just, you know, documenting an operation, a forensic operation. So what is interesting about this in relation to our exhibition is that there was a coincidence. So on the same day, in the same days, there was this installation of exactly the same boat as part of the Swiss Icelandic artist Christopher Büchel installation at the Venice Biennale. So he spent millions to move the relic from Augusta to Venice. And he just put it on display at the Venice Biennale inside the Arsenale, which is of course a port, a harbor itself. So quite difficult actually to realize that this might be an installation. There was a little caption, but nothing more than that. So so one of the most problematic aspects, of course, of this installation was that the artist did not accompany the boat of context with specific information about the context, the more general context. So this proved to be highly paradoxical, as the boat could easily be mistaken as just another boat in the city of boats. And the location was also problematic because it was near to a rest area. You can see in the third image of the Biennale, just opposite a coffee and a snack bar, an outdoor seating space, apparently one of the few with Wi-Fi points, and portable toilets around. So it was not really straightforward and easy to recognize the boat as part of the art exhibition. And the press release informed that this work should be seen as a relic of a human tragedy, but also a monument to contemporary migration, engaging real and symbolic borders and the impossibility of freedom of movement of information and people, etc., etc. So I just leave it here because you might come back in the discussion and how the two things contrast. And I've probably just close by quoting from Ian Chambers, who wrote a wonderful chapter in our catalog. And that's what he says about the exhibition. Clearly, the works on display register the under-discussed closing down of Europe as the waves of its colonial history rolled back to its shore, carrying the bodies of those that Occidental power and knowledge had previously reduced to objects of its design. Removing the Mediterranean from a single register, respecting the complexity of its historical and cultural formation, means not simply reintroducing the night stories and voices, or opting for the other shore and pretending to be able to see the world from the subaltern perspective. It means dismantling the assumptions of the knowledge and languages that have brought us here, not to delete them, but to expose them in another unauthorized configuration, and perhaps that to acquire a critical apprenticeship in speaking in its proximity. I believe that Sing Without Trace necessarily draws us in that direction. And I think Chambers calls attention to an important aspect of the work in the exhibition, which is the ability to go beyond the sentimental politics and a call for compassion. So Ramsey and Hirzel's works clearly expose the undignified strategies of governmental mismanagement of the death of those at the margin of precariousness. So by allowing the viewer to expose migrant deaths at sea from perspectives which are concealed in the public discourse, the artist encourage a critical mourning that acknowledge the problematic position of the West in the connected history of the Black Mediterranean, to borrow a very interesting concept by Alessadra Di Maio. Thank you all. Sorry if I have taken too long.
No, thank you, Fede. Thank you very much. Perfect time. Thank you for your incredibly deep presentation, and also for offering us such a cutting edge investigation of migration and the consequences of migratory fluxes of human beings at sea, as well as for providing us with alternatives in the context of the visual arts that somehow allow the migrants to have a voice and to speak out. So it's quite interesting how we have just moved from a literary framework, which Eleonora provided, and now Federica provided a framework within the context of the visual arts through the aesthetics of subversion. Now, I would like to thank you again, Fede. We will have time for discussion and for questions and comments later. Now we have our third speaker, who is Africa Vidal. Africa is a professor of translation at the University of Salamanca, and she is also the principal investigator of the research group entitled Research, Ideology and Culture, which focuses in particular on cultural and ideological aspects of translation seen as a key epistemological concept of our globalized society. Her research interests focus on translation theory, post-structuralism, post-colonialism, contemporary art, and gender studies. And she has also participated in international conferences and has been invited guest lecturing at many universities across the world. She has published many anthologies. I'm not going to mention all your anthologies, Africa. I will simply mention one of the latest anthology, which is the Routledge Handbook of Spanish Translation Studies, co-edited with Roberto Valdeón, and she has published extensively in journals, international journals, and edited volumes. Africa is also a member of the International Advisory Board of several international journals, and she's also practicing translation in the field of philosophy, literature, and contemporary art. The title of Africa's presentation today is Translating Translated Lives, and we have the pleasure and honor to have you, Africa. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alessadra. And it's really a great pleasure to be here with you and with Professor Eleonora Federici and Professor Federica Mazzara. So thank you very much for your invitation. It's a real honor. I will try now to. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, Africa. Yes, we can see your presentation. If you want, you can use the full modality or you can leave it as it is. It's just up to you. I mean, we can see it. Yes, it's fine.
Okay, I'll leave it there if you don't mind.
Yes.
Okay. Well, today I'd like to talk to you about literature again, and it's a kind of literature which makes us reflect on a contemporary tragedy, as Professor Mazzara has just shown us. Millions of people moving, being translated into a different context, living in a different language from the one they were born to, and in a different system of values. Bauman wrote, as we all know, a wonderful book some years ago called Wasted Lives. They are, as Ulrich Beck says, the losers of globalization. They are the ones who live both literally and metaphorically on the border between languages, accents, and systems of values. They are the subaltern, as Gayatri Spivak calls them, and they are those who are not allowed to speak. They are usually silenced and stereotyped. Migrants are on many occasions physically present but remain unseen, as Federica Mazzara has just told us, and this lack of full visibility is translated into an extreme form of vulnerability. Migrants speak Englishes rather than English, because not only when they don't know the language of their new, between inverted commas, homeland, but also, and perhaps even worse, at that stage when they are supposed to have learned it. Many of them never manage to speak the dominant language well. As Eleonora said before, they are deemed to speak weirdly in terms of both grammar and accent. They speak with an accent. They speak weird, bad, and broken English. Ignoring linguistic diversity, the weird language of those who are, with inverted commas, different to us, is a form of symbolic violence, of making them remain unseen, and therefore a way of leaving them in a risk zone, marginalized and far from those spaces where order and monolingualism is synonymous of security. The prefix post in post-monolingualism has a political and critical function, since it opposes the monolingual paradigm understood as political stance. There are many contemporary writers involved in giving voice to these contemporary identities. They represent their works, with their work, how to live multiple belongings. They write on the complexity of being more than one, which is a subversion of monochord thinking. As you see on the slide, these writers have in common that many of them do not write in their mother tongue. Today's literature has thus become, as Salman Rushdie says, a post-colonial novel, a decent and transnational, interlingual, cross-cultural novel. For example, we find Turkish, Arab, Japanese, Italian, Spanish, and Czech writers who write in German. Asia Jabbar, Abdelkabir Khatibi, and as you see there, Amin Malouf are French writers whose mother tongue is Arabic. Michael Ondaatje, the author of The English Patient, is a Sri Lankan Dutchman living in Canada, whereas modern Italian literature includes writers born in Ethiopia, Morocco, Tunisia, and Senegal. Undoubtedly, many other authors could also be cited here. All of them live in translation, and they are translated lives, as I will try to explain. One of many examples, as we all know, is Leila Boulela, the author of The Translator, who was born in Cairo to an Egyptian mother and a Sudanese father. Another example could be, we all know it, Eva Hoffman, a very well-known writer who describes her experiences in exile after migrating from Krakow to settle in Vancouver. And she states that Polish is no longer her only language and that she regards translation as a kind of therapy. That's what she says. And of course, many other writers, for example, Yoko Tawada, a Japanese author who writes in Japanese and German, and who is building an identity based on traces and superimposed layers. This multilingual network causes her to live in a state of continuous translation, and that's what she says again. And another example could be, for example, Khatibi, who explains what it means to live between two languages without belonging to either of them. As you can see there, and if you're interested, of course, I can give the quotation to Alessadra afterwards. Another example could be Edwidh Danticat, the Haitian American writer, and her language contains traces of Creole, French, and English, which she uses to recreate the diasporic, transnational, and deterritorialized consciousness of traumatic experiences of Haitians, for instance, in Cric-Crac, the farming of bones, or in Claire of sea light. And of course, her idea of mobile traditions, extranational spaces, as described in Breath, Eyes, Memory, or her idea, as you see there, of English. She calls English her stepmother tongue, which is really interesting. We can go back to this if we have time afterwards. Well, this state of affairs invites us to re-examine and rethink the traditional idea of that language is linked to national identity. What happens when the domain of national language is occupied by non-native writers, writers whose native mother, home, or community language is not the one they write in? This fact, which is so generalized today, makes us wonder, what is the point of speaking of pure literary canons, English, French, Spanish, Italian, when literary awards such as the Man Booker Prize, National Book Award, or Pulitzer Prize are often won by writers whose mother tongue is not English, or who have arrived in a country as migrants or exiles. This is a proof that books no longer exist in a single literary system, but rather are born in translation. A good example of this is what the Pulitzer Prize winner, Junot Díaz, does with language. For him, the interweaving of various languages is really enriching. In this quotation, for instance, he says, "The thing with me is not so much that I have like either Spanish or an English voice. It's more that I have those two voices running through my head at the same time." And I think that is the really important thing, at the same time. And further below, he says, "I feel both languages are running simultaneously." Sorry, Díaz does not translate the words he uses in Spanish, and he does this as a political act. He wants the dominant culture to feel fear of the other, who is not understood and therefore seen as a hazard. He says, for instance, and this, of course, my Spanish is my mother tongue, or my stepmother tongue, but this is difficult for me to understand too. He says, for instance, "For those capitaleños who never lived the 27 de febrero or who think Wally is the center of the universe, Samaná es una chulería, they ate pescado frito and waded in the rio." The brief, wondrous life of Oscar Wilde is written in Spanglish, inflated, slang-filled prose. For instance, he says, "Listen, Palomo, you have to grab a muchacha and méteselo. That will take care of everything. Start with a fea, coge," that is, it's not good Spanish either, coge, "that fea y méteselo. Hijo, you are the most buen mozo," which is not, again, it's not good Spanish, "man I know." With this interweaving of languages, Díaz creates a border gnosis, whose aim is to absorb and displace hegemonic forms of knowledge into the perspective of the subaltern. This is not a new form of syncretism of hybridity, but an intense battlefield in the long history of colonial knowledge and legitimation of the colonial difference. And this is what Mignolo says. It is also worth highlighting that Díaz texts are not multilingual, but also include non-standard varieties of Spanish and English. And in doing so, he challenges the target culture's expectations, something that happens in a wide range of languages. It is also relevant to know that in his novels, Díaz writes some sentences in English, but with Spanish syntax, and some words are written just as they are pronounced in Caribbean Spanish. For instance, Nueva York instead of New York, or Nueva York. Dialects, non-standard varieties of languages sound different, and that feature is there once again because it is menacing for the establishment. Accents have political meanings, which need to be interpreted and translated. Díaz uses in Spanish some words related to food. For instance, as you see here, "Hija," she said while frying pastelitos, "maybe you need help." We jumped on each other and the table fell, and the sancocho spilled all over the floor. Heaps of plátanos and yuca smothered in liver or queso frito. And many swear words and foul language with sexual connotations are always written in Spanish. For instance, jodido, puta, pendejada, maricón, choca, cueros, rabo, cara de culo. Especially in The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde and in This Is How You Lose Her. For Díaz, linguistic violence is a political act. He says, "You come to the United States and the United States begins immediately, systematically to erase you in every way, to suppress those things which it considers not digestible. You spend a lot of time being colonized. Then, if you've got the opportunity and the breathing space and the guidance, you immediately begin to decolonize yourself. And in that process, you relearn names for yourself and that you had forgotten." His use of language harms the homogeneous ordered, static world of the status quo. These examples show how Diaz does not succumb to major languages and how his weird English and Spanish does not become a mirror image of the dominant language. By rejecting monoculture, his hybrid subversive language highlights otherness, difference, and the English-only politics. And the consequence is tension resulting from the dominant response of power in favor of monochrome and uniform rules and against hybridity, multiplicity, and mixing. This weird use of English is, as Salman Rushdie said decades ago, a political statement. We can't simply use the language the way the British did. Something similar to what Chinua Achebe once said. My answer to the question, can an African ever learn English well enough to be able to use it effectively in creative writing, is certainly yes. If, on the other hand, you ask, can he ever learn to use it like a native speaker, I should say, I hope not. Many other writers could be mentioned here. For instance, Gabriel Ocara, who distorts standard English in The Voice, Keros Awuwiwa in Sothobol, where he speaks of big grammar and grammar plenty. Asian American writers like Cathy Park Hong's Bad English in Dance Dance Revolution, Teresa Cha's Dictée, to quote but a few. Their weird, non-standard use of language aims to destabilize asymmetries and give voice to subalterns. Good English was the language they were expected to speak. They needed good English if they were to find a good job, as Gloria Anzaldúa says, and in this quotation. She says, I remember being caught speaking Spanish, and the Anglo teacher said, talking back, she said, if you want to be American, speak American. And of course, her mother said, para hallar un buen trabajo, to have a good job, you have to speak English without an accent. Something similar can be found in Alicia Gaspar de Alba, another Latin American writer. She says, at home, sorry, I was literally forbidden to speak English, but at school, I could only speak Spanish in my Spanish class. All the rest, I had to speak English. Puppet, for instance, by Margarita Cota Cárdenas, is another very good example of using language against power. Here, Spanglish is privileged against monolingualism. The first edition of this novella is mainly an oral text with very, very difficult passages for an only English reader and also for an only Spanish reader. For instance, she says, a ver cómo va, ja, 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 a ver que, the brown eyes, you see brown eyes, it's bad English, bad written, pala que, it's bad Spanish, me balancearon, bad Spanish, etc., etc. Writing Puppet in Spanish, she says, was a deliberate act and a language choice. When I asked her, Diana Rebolledo says, when I asked her why she wrote Puppet in Spanish, she said that for her, there were many things she couldn't say in English, many things she could hear in her memory, the joke, the dicho, the saying. It was a resistance to what she felt was linguistic and cultural annihilation. So English is broken here. Anzaldúa, of course, is one of the best-known Chicanas who highlights that having voice, being able to speak, gives you power. She describes this use of language in her wonderful Borderlands La Frontera. She describes this hybrid language as linguistic terrorism, a way to highlight how some varieties of language face discrimination. Linguistic terrorism is for her an active site for the construction of new identities. She says, wild tongues can be tamed, they can only be cut out. And of course, she has many, I don't have time to read them, but many brilliant quotations on how people have to construct their own language to have their own identity. And this is all very clearly explained in this wonderful collection of short essays called Lives in Translation, where many writers such as Yoko Tawada, Leila, Eva Hoffman, Ariel Dorfman, and many others talk of their way of writing as living in translation. Another wonderful example is this very recent, from 2022, very recent novel by Javier Zamora called Solito. It's written in English or hybrid English, but as you can see, the title is in not Spanish from Spain, but from El Salvador. Here, words related to religion are in Spanish. Words related to food, as in the case of Junot Diaz, are in Spanish. Cursing, again, in Spanish. And he also uses rotten English, bad English, sorry, rotten Spanish, and he uses Spanglish, like in that sentence. And he uses a very interesting recourse, which is, as you see there, both question marks. In English, you got your passport in order, but the question marks are in Spanish, in the Spanish system. So that is a very interesting way to hybridization. And then he mixes Salvadoreño and Mexican again. Caliche, the use of caliche is again, he says, a political act. And as you see in the foreword, again, he uses a bad use in English of the question marks. Okay, so in all these cases, they are translators in the sense Moira Anguilleri, already quoted here, says in her wonderful book on translation and migration, they serve the important additional function of protecting the social, linguistic, political, and legal rights of individuals through the hybrid use of language. And we could also say that translation is in all these cases posited not as an action to be performed or a skill to be learned, but a condition of living, as Simona Bertacco and Nicoletta Valorani say in their wonderful book. So in all these cases, they are examples of what Emily Apter calls mixed tongue as a way of contesting the imperium of global English. In all these cases, multilingualism is dangerous. That is why Bell Hooks said, "We fear those who speak about us, who do not speak to us and with us. We know what it is like to be silenced. We know that the forces that silence us because they never want us to speak." So translators know very well that the unity of language is fundamentally political, as Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari argue in some of their books. The dominance of American English is premised on registering non-local languages and accents as threats to the polity. So it's, as in this wonderful book, Ray Chow says, it's not like a native speaker, so they are always different to us. And as Vicente Rafael argues, the hegemony of language, of English, thus emerged by way of reorganizing the landscape and of linguistic pluralism. Unsettling the lingua franca means assuming English as a language always in translation. So language, as Siri Nergar says, is felt as a part of a person's home And we are as we are also because we use a certain language and share it with others who we understand and who feel understand us. So language is, in all these cases, for all these writers, perhaps more than anywhere else, closely connected to identity and to belonging. Language is felt as part of a person and as home. Their multi-layered language, their hybrid languages, mirrors complex and multiple selves in a migrant condition. These writers give voice to people who live in the middle of two worlds and who use language to highlight difference. Their linguistic aberrations, turn them into a linguistic nightmare for the establishment. And the language they use describes their experiences of living in between languages and worldviews. Living in a constant state of translation may reopen linguistic pluralism repressed by dominant views on language, which in the colonialist tradition used translation to domesticate foreign languages. Blending idioms and worldviews is here a conscious and deeply political act. And by living and within translation, interweaving languages, linguistic terrorists demonstrate that nobody can know a language or control what its speakers do with it. Translation is so a way to deconstruct borders, which, as Anzaldúa says, are set up to define places that are safe and unsafe. Translated lives continually walk out of one culture and into another. And they speak, as Gina Valdez says, English con salsa. Welcome, muchachos, learn the language of dólares and dolores. Welcome to English surely Latinized, Inglés con chile y cilantro. English as American as Benito Juárez. English refrito, English con sal y limón. English thick as mango juice. English poured from a clay jug. English tuned like a requinto from Uruapan. English lighted by Oaxacan domes. English spiked with mezcal from Juchitán. English with a red cactus flower blooming in its heart. They demonstrate so that translation is a way of life. Translation becomes a tool to raise questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Africa. Thank you very much. Sorry, I was not able to unmute myself, and now okay, my camera is also on. So thanks to you, and thank you for your really stimulating and inspiring talk, which clearly makes an opposition between monolingualism and translingualism. As something where language is not simply an instrument of communication, but clearly becomes a crucial network of cultural crossroads. So thank you for your inspiring concepts and reflection upon migration from a literary and culturalist perspective. Now, I would like to invite Eleonora and Federica to turn on the cameras, both of them. And I also would like to invite the audience to ask questions, and please don't be shy. It's just, a debate on a very hot topic, and it would be very nice to, clarify some points, to reflect upon some issues and concepts that our speakers have shed light upon. So I invite the audience to ask questions. Okay, I will ask my first question to Eleonora.
So, may I ask Africa to stop sharing the screen so we can see each other a bit better?
Oh, yes, Africa.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks, Africa.
I'm also reading the chat. So if Africa closes, yes, okay. Still, your screen is on, Africa.
I know.
No problem.
Is it okay now?
Okay. Yes, that's fine. So
Sorry,
I
I'm
will,
sorry.
no problem. So the chat is ready. So if you want to just write questions by using the chat, please feel free. Anyway, so I will start with Eleonora. Eleonora, you were at some point, probably at the beginning of your presentation, you were referring to the concept of cultural inclusion, which is a concept that I like very much because I do work in particular. I have started working in particular in relation to some minority groups. I'm referring to the deaf and the blind and visually impaired persons. So I was wondering whether this concept of cultural inclusion you were referring to implies that the migrants become, in a way, also end users of a literary work. And I mean, this question is also open to Federica, who is talking about the role of migrants in the visual arts and also to Africa. So the idea of talking about the migrants is, ideologically speaking, a great thing, but I was wondering whether what is the final result of this kind of investigation? Is there any involvement of the migrants in terms of inclusions, no more in terms of accessibility, but in terms of inclusion within the social settings? And you were also referring to the role of the intermediary languages. You were referring to the concept of interpretation, and actually, in this context, the importance of the intercultural mediator is crucial, because the intercultural mediator, especially in settings like, for example, healthcare settings, becomes absolutely important. So my question is exactly this, to contextualize the role of the migrant within some specific social cultural contexts where the migrant become an end user.
Yes, no, I mean it's a very big question. I think I have given a lot of hints and frameworks. So yeah, sometimes it's difficult to follow all the red threads. But I mean, my research is on two sides. One is to look at this kind of everyday life, more practical domain, okay, where you have, of course, people that need to be kind of cultural mediator, also because one of our courses is on cultural mediator, so you need to, of course, teach a student, I think, also to understand that it's not only learning the language, but they need to be aware that they would have to be kind of bridges, and understand and be open-minded on that, and be able to cross actually borders. That's why, and maybe this is the feeble link, but that's why I think, that we could take any kind of textual, or also not only textual, I mean, any kind of typology of forms of art of migrants, in order not to have a different perspective. I mean, not to talk for them, as Africa was saying, but to let them talk, So I found a lot of connection, in different way with both speaker, and I'm very glad. Thank you very much for both talk. But the idea is that if you're able to use any material, also for example in classes, it is a way to create a kind of different education, so that at this point, people are it's not only accessibility, but it's inclusion, because you make people think. And generally speaking, this would be, I would like that, that any reader reads this kind of writings, you know, let's aside, yeah, the use of language that Africa explained very much, be it Italian, be it English, I mean, the hybridization, but, you know, just thinking about the topic, what they are about, you know, if people open their mind, they begin to read this kind of testimonies because they are testimony, maybe, you know, the perception of the migrant would be different, you know, and maybe, you know, the stereotype would be deconstructed. I don't know if I reply to you, but
yes, Federica, absolutely. Yes, this is what I mean. Clearly, reading this kind of books, also with reference to John Palairi, where you had this intersection of languages and cultures, or all the examples taken into account by Africa, they clearly give a different perception of migration. And this is actually inclusion. So in a way, yes, because I mean, John Palairi, she's a migrant herself. So we are talking about writers who are writing as migrants. So yes, you answered my question. And I have a question for Federica, which is about these strategies of reframing she's talking about as practices, as instruments that again give access, give voice to the migrants. I'm sure you also consider these practices of reframing as a form of translation, a form of retranslation, a form of a counter-narrative. And I would like to know, so it's quite similar question to the one I previously asked to Eleonora. Do you think that in this process of translation through the aesthetics, so through artworks, these migrants have a voice, have a clear voice, they can speak out somehow? And do you think that the community appreciates these?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for the question, Ale. I mean, in line with what Eleonora said, all the work I do, it's very much informed by the autonomy of migration. So this idea that what we need to prioritize is the subjectivity and the experience of migrants. I actually don't like expressions like giving voice or empowering people. I avoid these expressions all the time. Because they're part of the discourse, they're part of the discourse we use. I'd rather, you know, encourage a way of thinking where we are allies, we work in solidarity, and of course they are the real subjects and those who must promote the new narrative. Is not to us, it's not. We don't have the power because, of course, we have not experienced directly this. So for the exhibition, just to get back to my case study, there was an important premise. So we don't do the exhibition unless at least half of the artists involved are not themselves refugees or asylum seekers, those who have experienced. So we have worked together, and we have, and the idea was we're just, you know, facilitating because we have the tools that maybe they don't have. So we just make available funding, so we make available resources. But the idea is a teamwork, and we just make visible what, or again, making visible. I'm still looking for the right word, but you know what I mean. So absolutely, the subjectivity, the subjective dimension, where academics, we're just, you know, working as allies.
Yes. Yes, I was. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, the translation thing. I'm sorry, I didn't address.
No, yes, the translation thing. Yes.
Yes, sorry, of course. I mean, yes, as you know, I have a background in translation. That's how Ale and I met more than 20 years ago. I mean, absolutely. I mean, translation for me is a creative practice. You know, again, in line with Basnet and Lefebvre. This idea of rewriting, of creating, the translator is there. We could say a bit like an ally as well. So absolutely, this idea of subversion, reframing, it's very much an act of translation and translating alternative cases into new products. So yes, I like the idea of looking at these practices as forms of translation.
Yes, somehow it's what Eleonora said when she referred to the concept of metaphorical translation. In a way, this is a case of metaphorical translation. So translation is really an umbrella term. It's more metaphorical. One of the interesting definitions provided by Mona Baker is about this dichotomy, where she sees a translation as a broad concept on the one hand, implying actually the metaphors of translation, and on the other hand, the idea of the narrow translation, which is the proper translation in which you are translating in practice. So the idea of, for example, translating your own subjectivity, which is the migrant subjectivity, into the visual arts is a kind of intersemiotic translation, but it is proper translation. So that's quite interesting. And I mean, these are all concepts, very, very useful concepts, especially in the context of the didactics of translation, because they somehow open the students' horizons and help them to be interpretative and so on and so forth. And when Federica was talking about this role of subjectivity, I was thinking of the Refugee Week that you have in London, which is still existing, right? And this Refugee Week is somehow a real kind of stage featuring arts, performances, exhibitions where the migrants themselves become end users. Again, I like using this term because we use this term when we refer to audiovisual translation, and we actually call the deaf and the blind to see if our products are actually good products. So we test our products through them and they become end users. So in this case, the Refugee Week is a very good stage where the migrants can express.
I mean, it's an incredible initiative that has now reached the 20th year. And I've seen it over the past decade, how it has grown and in popularity, and it's at UK level, and it's from, it's kind of grassroots, so everybody can join and invent or create an event around the topic, but it's mostly to support artists with migrant background and to support them in also in the making of this. And what is interesting is that now that's been recognized at institutional level, so there would always be events at British Museum or Victoria and Albert, so there will be now the big museums hosting some of these initiatives. So it is really becoming a great platform.
Yeah, and Africa, I would like you to maybe say something more about this, the meaning and the function of translingualism in the context of the works you have shed light upon. Because I think that everything somehow revolves around this concept of translingualism in literature, in the arts, in sociology. I mean, all fields have this key concept which creates an interaction between people. Say languages and people can interact thanks to these. So it would be interesting if you could say something more about this concept.
Yes, well, I'm literally fascinated by the idea of translingualism, because to me it means that language reflects multiple identities, and it also has to do with it was very brief in one of my slides on one of them, but this idea of the Les Guattari on minor and major literatures, not minor becoming major, but the other way around, major becoming minor. So when I said that when I read, of course, my main language is Spanish, and then I sort of can speak and understand English. But when I read, for instance, Junot Díaz or Sandra Cisneros or Gloria Anzaldúa, sometimes it's difficult for me, because that's the main idea. I mean, they don't want me as Salman Rushdie says, we don't want to speak the way the British did, and we don't want to speak the way the Spanish speak. So this translingualism or these hybrid languages, on the one hand, they reflect multiplicity, difference, and all this. And at the same time, it makes us think of how difficult it is to be between languages and between cultures. And at the same time, there's another thing. It's really fascinating, the question of accents. Of course, this was also very, very brief in my presentation, but there is a artist, performer, poet, I don't know how to call her, Caroline Berval, and she has this wonderful work, artwork, or whatever you want to call it, called Say Parsley. And what she does is it's a sort of performance where migrants say parsley in different accents. And so you never say that word as we do. And, you know, the idea of, as Rachel, the title of her book, Not Like a Native Speaker. And language is a way of rejecting people. And that's really interesting, how racism can be experimented in many ways, not only, you know, in the very open and explicit way. And I think in many ways, this way of experimented racism in a not that open way is even more dangerous than in an open way. So language is here really a political act. And that's, I think, the main question. And of course, translating these works is really an ethical challenge, because it's very, very difficult to keep all those differences, because sometimes you do want to keep them, but you cannot, you don't find it in your native language. So it's a real challenge to translate those translated beings.
Absolutely, I agree. That's a challenge. And I think we had to make the effort, Eleonora, to find some strategies. There are so many taxonomies, including strategies for cultural references. And I think we had to find at some point strategies for this kind of issues, which are crucial, especially in literature. But also in the context of, I don't know, popular TV series, which are more and more multilingual. You can see that both dubbers and subtitlers make use of incredibly original strategies. They are really subverting what was the original strategies in the context of AV products. So it's clearly something new, something original, something we have to think of. So yes, I absolutely agree. But now this is a conversation between the four of us. Maybe I can again try to persuade the audience to ask questions also via chat. Maybe there is a question.
There is a question.
Yeah. Oh yes, there is a long question. Okay, by Shanazan Parven. I'm going to read the question for you. I want to express my gratitude to all of you for your excellent presentations. I'd like to specifically address Professor Federica Mazzara presentation, which tackled a sensitive topic. Despite the existing rules prohibiting unauthorized border crossing or crossing the Mediterranean Sea, many people are forced to do so. Unfortunately, some locals support these dangerous journeys because they can exploit the migrants for cheap labor. Even when politicians claim that they do not want to stop these tragic voyages, their acceptance of money is actually validating and enabling them. Federica, I think this is a question for you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's probably more a comment than a question, but I can add something on these lines. Absolutely, I agree with you. It's a very complicated issue, and it is very much about exploiting the people in need from both sides, of course. And we should also always remember that when it comes to the regulation of migration, we always deal with the local policies. So it's there is an international legal framework, human rights law, humanitarian law, which are all, of course, good in principle. But after all, is the customary law. So it's the law of the state that decides how to manage the human movement. So unfortunately, we will be very difficult to actually stop these loss of lives or, of course, exploitment of migrants at a labor level. So that yes, there won't be. It is a business as well, of course, now, and not to mention the externalization of borders and these partnerships and agreements. If you consider, for instance, 6 million that the EU pays to Turkey to regulate the migration, and if you actually go and see the camps where these people are kept, it's absolutely unbearable. So yes, it's incredible and very sad, and I don't think, unfortunately, there'll be much that can be done to. They won't be. The interest of the Western countries is to keep this unbalance between the country involved. So yeah, all we can do is to try and keep on challenge, never stop challenging this and resisting and subverting and proposing new gazes.
Yes, thanks, Fede, for your answer. Yes, I mean, and then this think of this cheap labor is really disgusting. So I mean, it's really tough. I mean, we're talking about something which is really tough to solve. And as Federica said, we can, carry on and fight. But the solutions are maybe still far away. I still remember those times of the jungle. You remember the jungle at Calais, which was a terrible situation where also one of the artists went physically circulating, trying to help the migrants. But then this jungle was destroyed, I remember. Now it doesn't exist anymore. The Calais jungle
It's still there. Still improvised camps. Yeah, of course, it will never stop Calais.
But there was at some point that they destroyed the jungle.
They dismantle, but then they always hang around there because they have nowhere else to go. So yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we still have a comment. I will hardly concur with you. In addition, the EU also provided a huge sum to Bosnia. Yeah.
And I'm in contact with a representative from UNHCR, is one of my best friends. So we always discussion about this, and it's interesting, of course, how also the UNHCR, which is somehow the power to act in terms of respect of refugees and protection of human rights. I mean, the power they have is actually quite minimal when it comes then to managing the money, etc., etc. So everything is beautiful in principle, but then in the practical side, things are very different. Ciao, Ale.
Yes, very much different than in practice. Ale, hello. Would you like to add a comment?
Hello. I don't know. I would like to add a lot of comments, but of course, there's no time. I think it would be much nicer. I see that there are like some students, former students, colleagues. I don't want this to become just a conversation among us. So I would be happy to, leave the floor to somebody and intervene a bit later. But, if there are any other questions, any other hands up, any other comments? If not, I will go on. Well, okay. Maybe when people are warming up, I will just, throw in the English language in the big context. And I want to thank you all for these amazing presentations. Thank you so much for, also having really created a framework for us that has dealt with the fundamental issues like, symmetrical relations, counter-narratives, translinguism, I would add transnationalism, democracy, because I think that was the implied concept, how can we really talk about democracy in contexts like this? But what I really would like to throw in is basically the role of the English language in all this that, at least on a superficial level, seems to absolutely deny what we've been talking about because it's so dominant. It's the hegemonic paradigm. It's the language that we are using. And I mean, none of us is English or, a native English speaker. So what does it mean? How can we talk about translation, migration, talking about specificity and translinguism when English is still, or English is, or the English continuum is still, the hegemonic paradigm? And mind you, I'm asking you this, but this is the question that me as a professor of English asks herself every single day and tries to, tackle this with students. But I feel we have this huge, giant in the room, this elephant in the room that we cannot pretend is not there. And so I was wondering, if I can share my frustration with you, and if you have any comments on that. And I thank you really very, very much, all of you.
Can I say something about it? Yes, that was why I chose the second example, because it is quite controversial. No, you decide to write about your own experience in Italy, talking about, the discourses, because this is the other story, how these people are represented, through the news, through many kind of multimodal or anyway a text of any kind. So, but yes, this was my question. Why would you choose to write something in English? Okay, a comic book, maybe it's for younger people, so you think that a wider audience can read it, can understand it. But on the other way, it is a very political choice. I think. I mean, we are always struggling with that, and I think many of the writers publish in English because, of course, there are, as I said, there are a lot of marketing strategies behind, some like for example, I always make a comparison with Giampalairi and Chimamanda Adichie. I think it's very similar from different perspectives, but they have really created a marketing around some of the figures. So you present, someone at the big literary events, you translate anything they write, but always, taking as the first language English. So I completely agree with you. And I agree with Africa that, there are some writers that are much more interesting if we look at the language that we use. I mean, the hybridity of language. If we read, Adichie is not so hybridized, it's very standardized, and she is one of the most known, sold, etc. So no, Alessadra, I agree. It's very frustrating, and I think we should think about, it's quite ambivalent, I think.
Well, Federica, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I would like, of course, I absolutely agree with you, Alessadra, but I'd like to add a sort of optimistic view on this. Well, on the one hand, I think it's very, very interesting, very important that there are many writers today writing in Englishes. I mean, not the standard good English. There are thousands of them. And I think that is a sort of, a sort of open air, no? And a sort of light. And on the other hand, well, of course, many translators are now translating into a hybrid way of translating that's, let's say, at least in Spain, 10 or 15 years ago, we could not dream about that. But on the other hand, I was thinking of an example. Of course, I agree with Eleonora and with you, but if you think of the Nobel Prize last novel, John Coetzee, he has just published his, in 2022, you remember that he published El Polaco in Spanish, in Spanish translation, and not in Spanish from Spain, in Argentinian Spanish, in a very small publishing house in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And he doesn't want to be, I was going to say to be translated. No, he doesn't want the original English to appear till the end September 2023, because he says in many, many interviews that he doesn't want his novel to be read in English first. And I read, when it appeared, I read the Spanish translation. Again, it's Argentinian Spanish. And I'm really eager to read the English when it appears, because some things I don't know how he wrote that in the original. If the English is the original, I don't really know which one is the original. Is the translation the original, or is the English the original appearing in the second place? And when he many times in the Spanish version, in the Spanish original, I would say, the Spanish original plays with English as a second language. So that's really very, very interesting. And that's a sort of, an optimistic comment to your.
Yeah, I think I'm on that side too, in the sense I think we should look at the way we use English as a weapon, as a tool, like using the language of the empire to talk against the empire. And in my small world, I use English to criticize the monarchy on a daily basis with my British friends. So it's it's a language that has allowed us to get together and to find our new language. We all speak English with an accent, and we have been able to share views and ideas and build our resistance. I don't see English necessarily as a problem, especially when you look at the way writers have engaged with language, as the Eleonora and Africa have shown us. So like a creative weapon more than just something I feel oppressed by, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I also agree with Federica and Africa in the sense that, I don't feel this perception that it is a hegemonic language. Also because we have, as Federica said, a variety of accents, and this is important. People want to keep the accent, the original accent when they speak in English. Or, for example, we have, a massive number of audiovisual products in the original language. We have to say also thanks to streaming platforms, and you can choose if you want to watch the product in the original language, if you want to use the subs, if you want to do the dubs. So I would say that it is still dominating, but mostly as a tool of communication. Although maybe in literature is a little bit different, because in literature there is still this tendency to use English as the instrument to express ideas, etc. So I don't know, maybe in literature is a little bit different. Maybe you can say this, I don't know.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank. No, go on, Africa.
No, sorry. Academic language, academic English is still a very difficult territory. I mean, if you don't publish your essays in good English, you are not published. Never. So that's a difficult space.
That's true. Although there are some journals that accept papers in different languages, but as
yes,
that's true,
but
the majority
not
is
many.
English. and
Yes.
a great level of English.
Yes.
In academic writing, yes, and maybe also in literature. I mean, English is still absorbing the literary
Yes.
paths, still dominating.
But the academia is just an isolated
Yeah,
world. I
sorry.
don't think we should.
Yes.
I don't think we should. Yeah, it's not the only one, unfortunately. So it's something that we can develop other alternative.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I just want to throw in a very final comment. I agree with all you've said. I think that still English is a dominant language. I think that we can subvert it, that we can resignify it, which is a dear term to me, that we can work on it, but it's still the hegemonic language, even in academia, even in museums, even in art galleries. It really still is. And I think it's not helpful to anybody to say it's not a problem. I think it is a problem, and we really have to work around it, because hegemony is part of power structures. But thank you, Africa, also for bringing up this example, from Coetzee, from the grandissimo Coetzee, which, is something that I had totally put aside in my mind. But just to mention finally, the problem of English in academia is there, like in Italy now we are asked, and I know that it's the same in different parts of Europe, to teach in English because that's more, valuable. We got more credits, which means we got more funding. So that's really problematic. It's right there. The other thing is, even in terms of publication, yes, Ale, you're right. There are a lot of journals right now who are which are concerned with our issues, which publish in several languages. But I'll give you just a very final example also, taking advantage of it to thank you, to thank Federica for mentioning my Black Mediterranean theory. I published the first essay on the Black Mediterranean, a theoretical essay, 12 years ago in Palermo. It's the only essay I've ever published in Palermo, and it was a political gesture, talking about what you were talking before, Africa and Eleonora. And it was very easy for this essay to be bypassed by a lot of, younger scholars who think they can speak Italian, but they don't read Italian academically. They don't think it's as valid, it's that validated. And this could happen only because of that. Now that I publish a new version with Harvard University and Indiana University Press, is going around and nobody's ignoring it. So we should all think about it. Even us, mainly us that, are pretty much professors of English, I think. But in any case, I'm done with it. And Ale, there is a question that I'll let you read.
Sorry,
Actually,
just one
couple.
thing. I didn't mean to downscale the problem of English being the big elephant in the room. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge the fact that through English, we're here now today. So if we would need a code of communication, right? So we need to keep on trying and keep the resistance alive all the time, absolutely, and talk about the problem of the English language. But at the same time, it's undeniable that it's through that specific code at the moment that we can communicate and share our struggles.
Sorry, can I just add something? No, I would say that the same. I mean, maybe I did, but I wasn't clear about the publishing market. I mean, in Italy, when we think about translation, a massive amount of works are translated from English, even if the original text was not in English. Okay, so I'm not going into it, but this is one. And the same, I'm sorry, but I agree with that, with a lot with Alessadra. I agree. And the other thing that I said is that how much you control the language, this makes a difference, because we are talking about people that like us, that can master the language. But yeah, the problem is, who can talk actually a medium level of, English in order to communicate. This is another, I think, is another problem. And yeah, sorry, but I stop. Otherwise, we go on with with this discussion. But...
Grazie.
Okay, so the question is from Solange Santarelli. Okay, from your, am I right? Yes, from your presentation, translingualism is seen, and I completely agree, as a fascinating phenomenon. However, I think about the use of other languages in pedagogical settings. For example, while learning the main language of the hosting country, the use of multilingualism while teaching is unfortunately not enough well seen by teachers. How is seen the use of multiple languages in literature at the moment? And then is the same question, which has been copied twice, because I have it copied twice. Perhaps you're already answering to the question. Now I'm realizing it. Yes, okay. Yes, I mean, she's saying that you are probably already answering to the question now. I am realizing while listening to you, but Africa, if you want to add a few comments on this role of multiple languages in literature, which is something you said, but if you want to add extra comments, please feel free.
I didn't quite understand the question. I mean, sorry.
It's just how much multilingualism is encouraged in literature, which is, I mean, you talk about Gloria and Saldou and...
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes. I really believe that each day, I mean, I can't cope with all the authors and all the writers which come one after the other and from all the languages in the world. I mean, as I said in my presentation, there are Turkish writers writing in German, and then Iranian and Pakistan, and I mean, all over. And of course, I only know a very reduced number. I concentrate in my research, I concentrate on Latin American